wondered if you could talk about this recent US intelligence report on the possibility of an armed conflict between India and China, and it actually called for US intervention. So one would think that the US has its hands full with the Ukraine war and noise about Taiwan. So why look for more trouble when neither side has asked for any intervention? What are your thoughts on that?
So, Namitaji, India and China, this war scenario, or even hallucinations of a full-scale war between India and China, is something which is ridiculous, and I'll tell you why. No two big economy serious civilizations, because both of these are civilizational nations. No two big economy serious civilizational countries would ever think of a full scale, full spectrum war. So, despite the clashes that we have at the LAC and the issues that are outstanding between India and China, you have to understand that both these nations can rent war zones in smaller nations around. They don't need to clash with each other at the LAC. You have many other smaller geographies where you can throw some amount and use as a war zone for different kinds of conflicts. So as long as I understand geopolitics, this India China full scale war scenario or a threat is something that the Western collective purposely pushes, because there are interests of defense deals. The Southeast Asian nations would then be desperate to have those defense deals and buying of weapons from the West. So I believe that this is a concocted theory. And I do not deny that there is a lack of trust between the two nations, India and China. And those hassles and, muscle fights is going to happen. Those clashes are going to happen because both the countries have different perceptions of what is LAC exactly. So, but you need to know that despite 2+ years of this LAC standoff, both the countries have maintained the agreement of no weapon use. So they are using bricks and bats and iron messes and everything, but the weapons are not allowed to both the armies. So I believe that no economy serious countries would go for that too of India and China size. And believe me, if Chinese had such an intent, then what were they waiting for? They were waiting for Rafales to flow in and S-400 to come in. I mean, they had at the entire Manmohan era of government in India where they could have done something if they wanted. So it's the mistrust which is being played up by the West, and I don't believe that these countries would ever go for a full spectrum war at the LAC. If there is possibility of some clash in the future of a military scale, I believe that would be somewhere around the Indian Ocean, not at the LAC.
So this kind of fits into your two buckets theory, right? You have one neighbor which is being sanctioned, China, and then you have the other one where they're trying to sell more weapons to, which is India.
So not just weapons, friend shoring is the new word which is coming in, where they are looking at shifting the manufacturing facilities to India, and also the high tech transfer that they are now willing to share with India. So this propping up of the two baskets continues, but I believe overall in the Gulf and the Asian region, this theory is now reversing. So even India and China, you will see once that BRICS currency format pilot transactions begin, you will see a series of cooperation, at least on the financial front, if not at the military front.
But I remember a tweet from you where you talked about Xi Jinping, or is it the foreign minister, Chinese foreign minister, saying that the two countries should look for their civilizational cooperation as they try to modernize.
Yes. So we have seen a change in the foreign minister of China. We had Wang Yi up until last year, and now we have the Chinese ambassador to US promoted as the new foreign minister in China. So the March 2022 meeting of the unannounced visit which Wang Yi had in India, at that point in time, he noted this fact to Ajit Doval that our NSA, that India and China, the kind of national rejuvenation that both these countries will have a far reaching impact all over the world. This was the exchange which both of them had. Now, this time, when the foreign minister, Chinese foreign minister, attended the G20 and had a bilateral with our external affairs minister Jaishankar, he repeated the statement and he said this is now once in a life century opportunity between the two nations to cooperate for respective national rejuvenation. Now, viewers need to know that this terminology is very interesting because national rejuvenation in China is directly linked to merging Taiwan with the mainland. So when the Chinese foreign minister says that we need to cooperate in the wisdom of achieving this, respective national rejuvenation, he's probably hinting at POK, the Pakistan occupied Kashmir. There is a good possibility that he's trying to indirectly hint that both of us can have our goals done if we understand this kind of cooperation is possible.
That's interesting. While we're on the subject of China, what's prompting them to think about trying to increase their birth rates from this one-child policy that they had, and this whole idea of giving more holidays, increasing the length of festivals, because that's kind of not what you would expect. You'd expect governments to want people to work more to increase productivity in the society. So why is this? This seems to be a bit of an about turn.
Yeah. So there are two very interesting events that happened in the previous century. The first one was the 1962 war with India. Now, the CPC of the Chinese Communist Party, which set in 1962, decided on the cultural revolution which began from 1965 and 66 onwards. So, my understanding of geopolitics is that this cultural revolution which China wanted to do within China, 1962 war was a precursor to that. It was their requirement to do it so, to give a physical punch to Dharma. Now, there is a very interesting statement by China's ambassador to US, Hu Shi, some 20 plus years before 1962, where he says India has culturally dominated China for centuries without firing a bullet across. So, what he's talking about is the India influenced religious practices and festivals, particularly Buddhism, which was so much prevalent throughout the Chinese population. Uh, Through this, India had a cultural domination over China. So, it's not a surprise that when they planned for a cultural revolution from 65 66, they had to give a physical punch to India in 1962, so that the pride on the religious practices and the dharmic influence of India over the Chinese population, that pride falls apart, and after that the entire brutal cultural revolution started. Now, what Xi Jinping could not understand, I mean, the Chinese Communist Party could not understand back in 1962 was that this very dharmic and religious practices and the festivals was an economic cycle that pushed up their economics. Now, in 2023, Xi Jinping is saying, let's go back to those festivals. He is saying he's increasing the days of festivals so that consumption and a spending cycle and domestic consumption increases within the Chinese economy. Because, as I said, post de-dollarization, a lot of exports are not going to be happening, especially to the West. So the people need to be oriented back for the internal cycle. Now, the previous two terms of Xi Jinping, he had a clash with his premier, Li Keqiang. Now, Li Keqiang was obviously had a financial background in terms of expertise, and he was a competitor of Xi Jinping before two terms in terms of that president position. Very interesting. This guy was demoted in the November 2022 Congress, And as we know that President Xi Jinping is now president for life. So what has happened very interesting is that the two guys who were on the Chinese Politburo, Li Keqiang and Wang, both of them were pro-West, pro-exports model. Both of them demoted from the Politburo, and now the Politburo that you have is completely anti-exports. So Xi Jinping was talking internal cycle for 2 terms, clashing with Li Keqiang. Now Li Keqiang is out of picture, and now he has a full authority to become anti-exports economy. Now, there's another interesting event of the previous century. So Deng Xiaoping visited President Carter in January 1979. He came there and he was in awe with the kind of industrialization that the American economy had. So he said that I want to open up Chinese economy. Whatever the negotiations they had in that meeting, he comes back to China and declares a brutal single child policy. So my understanding says that it was the US exchange with him that you cut down your domestic consumption, we pass on the technology to you to become the manufacturing giant, and you are going to be helping our spending model of the West by supplying the production that you do in your economy. So this entire technology give and take was based on cutting down domestic consumption home with a single child policy. Now you see the reversal today in 2023. Xi Jinping is saying increase the birth rates. A complete reversal of both the events 1962 and 1979.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.